Okay, are we ready, you think?
Yeah, go for it.
All right, I'm gonna get started. I didn't want to start talking because then I'll just ruin the timing of everything. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining me today. We are going to talk about data tables. My name is Billy Carlson. I'm a design educator here at Balsamiq. And yeah, we're going to talk about data tables. So why data tables? Well, I think it's because they're very common and they're also commonly not designed very well. And it doesn't take that much to make them better. So I'm going to discuss some of those options today in our basic UI design sort of upgrades or updates you can make. Also, I want to let you know that I'm have a list of the resources available, like stuff I talk about today. I'm going to have a list of the articles. I'm going to have the file I'm going to work on later available for you to look at if you want. And yeah, let's get going. We did want to touch quickly on privacy before we get going because it's important to our company that you know like how we handle privacy. So we plan on recording this. We are recording right now, and we're going to post this to YouTube and embed it on our site, which is balsamiq.com/learn. We have a webinar page there. Um, we aren't sharing your email in any way. Zoom collects everything. We're not going to go in there and do any of that. And if you would like to remain anonymous and ask questions, you can do that through the Q&A section of this webinar app through Zoom. So um, yeah, let's get going. Today, we're going to cover how to start a data table design project, or maybe even a data heavy design project. Talk about creating a rough layout, determining core interactions, and then we're going to kind of dive into the meat of it, the 6 tips for better designs. And then we're going to review thinking outside the table. And then I'm going to switch to Balsamiq and sort of demonstrate how I would approach this design problem. And then after that, we're going to have time for Q&A. I just wanted to let you know that this webinar is actually based on this article we have on our academy called Designing Effective Data Tables. The reason why we wrote it is just like I mentioned before, there's a lot of data tables out there and a lot of them aren't designed very well. And so we want to offer quick tips for improving that experience. So check it out. Again, I'll link to that and a resources page later. And I think we're ready to dive in. So we're going to talk about how to start. This is like a sneaky way of saying do some research. And ways that you can do research for any project, but specifically focusing on data and data tables is good to do site visits. It's also good to review the raw data, especially with the people who are going to be using the product and have to use that data. And then we're going to also talk about how you can research how other people do it. So I really like this image from Salesforce UX blog on Medium, and just talking about these things called site visits. And you go to where the company is, to where the people who are using the product work, and talk with them and watch them work. And one of the key insights you get from these site visits is an understanding of their environment. So the image on the left, I'm sorry, the image on the right is something I kind of encountered a little bit where I was doing some consulting for a logistics company. There were people who were using my software that I was working on and helped designing. They had like 3 screens and one with like the long vertical screen, and it was far different than how I worked. And I didn't really understand that until I went and talked with them. And then again on the image on the left with like more standard setup. So I kind of, if I go to a site visit or I speak with a user, I can see their environment and understand how they're going to be using the product. So is it going to be on a small screen like this in part of other windows, or is it going to be, the full width of the screen? Like right now I'm on a 27-inch monitor. Is it going to fill the whole screen? And if so, I want to know that because I'm going to design this interface to fit that. Like right now, this design would be really stretched out and actually not that easy to use. Another key insight for a site visit would be understanding their workflow. So is your application standalone and they just use that to do their job primarily, or is it part of like an app ecosystem where they use some of this data table work to then inform their work here, which then they'll send off here or generate a report. So, is it standalone or is it part of a system? That's really important to know. when you're designing it, because you want to also know how these other applications work and how they can all sort of work more seamlessly. Uh, One of the things I wanted to mention is that it's really hard right now to do site visits. Things are opening up slowly, but I would say the safest bet would be to do this through Zoom, which is totally possible. Just have your subject matters is share their whole screen and kind of watch as they work. And your job as the designer of this new product or fixing whatever you're trying to fix is to take notes. Watch them work, take notes, ask them questions, and look around what's around them or what else is on their screen that they may have to use. This is an UX term called a contextual inquiry, and it's one of the simplest forms of research, and it's really impactful. There's a next level up of a contextual inquiry that you can do, which is usability testing. And it's not too dissimilar, but what you do as a facilitator is you generate a list of tasks you want them to perform on the software, and then you watch them and they talk aloud, and you learn how they solve the problems that you give them. And it's really insightful. And I think this is like a step up from the contextual inquiry, because it's a lot more structured, but both work just as well. And then from all of that research, what you want to do next is create outputs. So what you're doing is taking everything you learned and then visualizing it in a way for other people to understand more clearly. So this is called a wire flow. And we recently released an article on our site about wire flows, so I'll make sure to link to that. But a wire flow is a great way to present what you learned from your site visits and from your research with the users about how they're actually using the application. Um, Another way that you can visualize this is through a user journey map. I'm sure a lot of you have seen these. And the same thing, you talk to the users of the products, you understand the steps they go through to perform their task they need to do, and then you can mark down what they think about it for each step, and then you're finding your pain points or finding where there's could be potential issues that you're there to solve. Just so you know that this template is also available, and I will post that. Excuse me, I'm gonna drink really quick. Another key insight they can get from a site visit or from speaking with users is understanding how the raw data is being used. So like what tasks are performed most often? Is there irrelevant or unused data? So you kind of want to understand what the importance of the data is. There's almost a hierarchy of importance. So this is just a example of a spreadsheet I saw online. But what I would do is a lot of times this data comes through as a spreadsheet or something from a database that doesn't look too dissimilar. And what I do is, say you're in a Zoom call and just review the data with them and have them call out like, okay, we don't really need to know the title. I don't really care about the office addresses because we only have 2 of them and it doesn't need to take up as much space as it does. I don't need to ever know their birthday. We can probably combine this contact information and maybe even combine it with the rest of their personal information. And it doesn't need to be its own column. And so some of the things that I think about when I'm looking at raw data is data in a data table is really impactful. Part of a data table is be able to sort the data just like Excel. So if I needed to sort all the different departments, I want to know that. But if I don't, then I can maybe combine it with something else because it's not as important to me. And the final piece of research I'll talk about is just seeing what currently exists out there. So, take a look around. You just spent a whole bunch of time understanding, what this product needs to do. And now you can go out and see like what already exists in this space. So since I'm a designer, one of the places I look often is Dribbble. And, I just typed in data table UI and I have all these options to look at. And what I'm doing is understanding ways I can take the data that I need to lay out and then put it into an interesting and usable format. Interesting about Dribbble is that sometimes their designs aren't so usable, but you get a lot of inspiration in understanding different ways to sort of approach the same problem. One of these stood out to me. I found this on Dribbble is, this is some crazy dashboard type design for sports betting, possibly. I don't know, I'm not exactly sure, but this is what drew my eye. And this is what is interesting to me is, these are essentially data table rows, but they're really full of data and they're not the standard Excel rows. So I was like, maybe I can use this type of design to lay out my data. It doesn't have to just be a row of data. You can design it any way you want and whatever is the most impactful for your users. I did want to mention, that there's a lot of frameworks out there that are typically even being used for data tables. So, if your company uses Salesforce, you can check out all the different ways that data tables are being used in the Lightning design system. And the same goes for Bootstrap. There's so many different ways data tables are used with those frameworks. Check them out and you can interact with them too in some places. So if you know what framework you're using, that it can also help inform how you design it. One of my favorite places to go to check out and get ideas for designs and interact with them is CodePen. So, I went to CodePen and typed in data table, and I thought this was really interesting. So that's kind of how you get started. I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything. And okay, so on to sort of like the design stage. We want to start with creating a rough layout. We want to block out content, show it to people, which is very important, and then add the raw data and apply basic UI design principles to it. So blocking out the content isn't actually that hard. Like you can do it within 10 seconds in Balsamiq or sketching it out. And, just try to explore different ways that you can lay out the content that makes sense based off of what you learned. There's different ways you can do it. You can also just use Postit Notes and do sort of like a collaboration with your team. You can do the same thing here, those like design sprints where you're sketching and you have Postit Notes and you're putting each other's Postit Notes on top of each other. That's a really great way to explore and block out content and think of different ways to lay out that data or what data, is the most important and where it should go. One of the ways I like to do it, actually I did want to mention mural is another good way you can do this, but one of the ways I like to do it is create these sort of sketchy rough layouts and add notes to my little very vague layout that express the importance of certain items. So like I heard that these are the most used actions, so I want to make sure that it's on the page. We talked about the possibility of having progress reports above the table. All those things you can really quickly sketch out and then share it. So one of our principles, so at Balsamiq, we've created something called, the education team created something called the 10 Principles of Effective User Interface Wireframes. And we made these cool animations. And the 10th, the final principle is to always validate your solution with users and team members. So don't forget that even at this early stage of just sketching and blocking out ideas, people can react to those, low fidelity outputs and provide really valuable insights. So don't forget to do that. So the next step is just to simply add the raw data. So, if you're starting to the design phase, I'm going to use Balsamiq, obviously, but just make it into a really lo-fi wireframe that you can start manipulating and start designing with. Really quick, I wanted to highlight this. I didn't know this until I wrote the article, but you can actually paste straight from Excel into Balsamiq's data grid control. So I made a quick little video to show you because I thought it was awesome. So copy your rows. Let's go right here and search for data table, data grid. Just paste it in there and there you go. So now you can easily start taking this and start designing, applying your basic UI design principles with them. So my joke with applying UI design principles is it sounds very easy, but it's actually really difficult. So what we hope to cover next is, some high-level tips of how to take some raw design like this and turn it into something that's more usable for your audience. So what we're calling that is the 6 tips for a better design. I'm not going to read these because these are the tips, and I'm going to go through them one by one right now. So tip number 1, try to group or hide as much information as you can. So right now, this was the raw data. There's 15 columns I counted before. And I talked with whoever uses this data all the time, and they told me, like, I don't need to know this. I don't sort by that. This is important. This isn't important. So I did my research, and I was able to determine that I can consolidate down to 10 columns, which saves me a lot of space. That's a lot of space that makes each of these columns have more room to breathe, so then more room for me to focus on. So one of the things I did is I took the shipping information and consolidated it. Same with the salesperson. And I moved the lines down. So this whole, this whole date was, one long line. I just did a line break, so it saved more column space. And again, it just gives me more horizontal space to view the data. Another thing you can do if you don't want to lose information or you need even more information, but it's not important that it's on the screen at all times, is you can create these little drop downs. And you can make your data table interactive in a way that it can show information, more information if it's needed, but not at this like general data table level. All right, tip number 2, use human language. So some of the things that I updated from the original was I changed the shipping company name from the number that we assigned to it to the actual company name, because this is something that I did at another company where we were using the ship code. We called it ship code number, and the ship code just meant what particular carrier we used. So I said, why don't we just use a carrier name? It's easier for anyone to look at this data to know what that means, so it's more accessible. Another thing I did is I took the numbers for the dates and turned them to alphanumerical instead of just numerical. So instead of November being 11, I made it NOV and abbreviated it. Another thing I added was adding like the TH and the ST for the dates. So the 1st or the 21st and the 11th. All of those, again, that's just personal opinion, but it makes it easier for me to to quickly glance actually at this data and read it very quickly without having to think too hard and really dig in. So if this said 11, 11, 20, 11, that would be confusing to me to read. I'd have to pay more attention. If I change it to just using the abbreviation of the month, it's actually easier for you to read. Tip number 3. This is one of the important ones, is use opacity to sort of minimize the visual impact of secondary information, but also use opacity or remove color when it's not needed. So I did a little fade here, but as you can see, I removed the outline of the table, the dark lines that separated the columns and the rows. And I also pushed back, I receded the secondary information using opacity for these less important pieces of information. One of the examples I use in the article is Spotify. So I created a wireframe of Spotify, and instead of following their design patterns, I made everything the same color. I made everything white on the screen to go against the black background. And just simply applying properties of opacity or pushing back the secondary information by making it lighter or darker in color really pushes the primary information at the forefront. So that's the whole purpose of that. It draws your attention to what's most important. And then if you choose to focus on an area, you can then choose to focus on the secondary information. Tip number 4, and this is a super easy one that I wish was used more often, is simply add more space between columns and rows. It allows the user to much easier, it gives them the easier ability to scan the data. So I can focus on rows far easier. I can focus on specific cells far easier. One of the things I hear a lot is like, I want to have more data on the screen, this whole above the fold thing that used to exist. It doesn't really matter because you don't need to see that much information at once. It's not going to be helpful. You can't scan it and understand it that quickly. So giving more space actually allows you to read this far faster. Oops, sorry. Tip number 5. This is a personal tip for me. I do not like seeing repeating actions in a UI really anywhere. So, if I can view and delete each of these rows, I really don't need to see that on every row. I can hover. The chance that I would not be hovering on the screen to indicate where I want to be and what I want to look at is very low. So once I interact with this table once, I'll start seeing that a row is highlighted and the actions that I need are right there. And I think it just really reduces the visual clutter from here. This is really, you can't really, I'm not pointing at it, but this view and delete is really sticking out to me as the primary thing on the page. Now the data has a lot more room here, and then this is important when I'm hovering on it. And tip number 6 is to use color in rows, cells, or text to elevate its prominence on the screen. So here we have these sort of pill shapes that we use to call out the status, because we heard from our users that what they're really looking at when they're scanning their data table data is for what the status is of a specific order. So I can use color to really call that out. I can also use color to make sure actions that are, detrimental or have like almost this warning red sign or color. And that's just another easy way to make my data easily glanceable, which I'm not sure is a word, but I made it up. I quickly wanted to touch on filtering and other features of data tables, because we really are focusing on just the data, but adding these extras, the ability to search, obviously, sort, filter, all of those are really important. That's the reason why you want to have a data table to begin with. You want to be able to select these rows and affect them. You want to be able to affect this data and save it for everyone to be able to see. But a lot of times what happens that I've seen while I'm working is that there's too much happening up here. There's trying to do too much with the filtering and adding too much, or forgetting a feature that we need to add, and this area becoming very crazy. So try to really limit to specific functions and features that'll just make it better. And you can add more functionality in other places, and I'll demonstrate. So like right now, obviously this is like a filter, a preset filter. If I want to filter to open, booked, or deleted, just click there. If I want to affect the tables and change their status, this is extremely easy. I usually would choose these actions based off of what I heard from the users, so I can change that status to deleted. Another feature that I feel like isn't as widely adopted, but is there, the ability is there, is to, click inside and edit the cells just like you would in Excel. So yeah. So I did want to briefly talk about alternative layouts. So this article we had in this webinar is about dealing with a lot of data. And not all data needs to be presented in the form of, like rows, like an Excel sheet. You can present data in lots of ways. So one of the designs I came up with is, having the row of order numbers here, and then really focusing on one single order at a time. Because this use case could be, for my job, I usually search for an order number, and then I have to make a change to one order at a time. I don't need to see all the orders at once, the content of all of them. I'm really one order at a time. So this type of design would make it far easier for them to perform their work here than it would be in a much smaller space. And you'll see this layout a lot. This sort of navigation affects this side of the screen. I saw this one came to mind because I was listening to this earlier today. But this is popular, like all of this affects what's here. So this has a lot of data in it too. You can think of your data table in this aspect. Another is just simply adding a high level sort of dashboard above your data table. So maybe you don't always need to be interacting with the data. Sometimes you just need a status report. You can combine status with the table very easily. And it also can make some people's job of having to, check what's going on with their system very easy. One design real world example is Google Analytics. They have all these analytics here, and then I can kind of dive in here. And I do have some sad Google Analytics reporting, but that's fine. This is one of my favorites, though, of taking data and turning it into sort of like this card UI layout. Essentially, it's the same thing as the other ones. Like a lot of the same data is presented here, but I don't have to see, again, rows and rows of data and like scanning. I can read a card and get the information I need very quickly. And then I can click on it and make changes to that order very quickly. The whole point of this is to not overwhelm you with data and try to limit how much you see at a time. And it's also easy to use, it should be easy and interactive to use in here. One example I was thinking of is how easy it is to use Pinterest. There's, lots of these types of sites, but if you think of your data in a different way, it could work just like this. And I just want you to sort of think about thinking outside the table a bit. That's the whole point of it. All right, so I'm going to do a live demo right now. So I want to essentially show all of you how I would recreate like a live table I saw on a website, or say it's the table that we use at my company. I'm going to bring it into Balsamiq and show you how to stylize it, and then talk about various ways that I would apply these UI designs. And then I'll show you other ways of, like, again, designing outside the table. So I'm going to share my whole screen and hope it's not too embarrassing. Okay. So what I want to do is show you this. So this is called fantasy football. I don't want to assume anyone knows anything about it, but it's just a really, I would say, not very usable data table for me. There's a lot of wasted space here. I also want you to know I'm not very smart about fantasy football. I didn't do very well. I was 10th place. I know really virtually nothing. I just kind of play because someone asked me to play, but it doesn't really matter. What you need to know is here's the table. I want to redesign this so it's more usable for someone like me who really doesn't know anything about football and was guilted into joining a team and now wants the simplest experience of managing this data that I'm getting. So I'm going to demonstrate how I'm going to take this table and then transfer it to Balsamiq and then start making design changes to it. So I'm just going to copy here. And this kind of goes to how you can copy and paste from Excel. I'm going to use numbers because I have a Mac. You can use Excel. I actually already know how many rows I need because I had to practice before. And so I'm going to select everything and paste it in here. Oops, I keep doing that. So I don't want to paste it with all of that style in it. So I'm going to paste it in a way that doesn't show the style. But I did it wrong, so give me a second. How about this? Edit, paste and match style. That's all I want to do. And I'm going to zoom out a bit so you can see all the data. So now I have this data in the data table, or sorry, in a numbers file, and I can copy it. Let me get rid of that. Copy it and bring it to Balsamiq. So there's a few things I want to do first, though, because again, I've already done this. When there's this extra text that shows up, in from the copy and paste. So I'm going to delete that, but I'm going to find and replace. Let's see if it shows up. Okay, so now I'm just going to replace and delete it. So that's good. And now I'm ready to copy it. So there's a few other adjustments I had to make, which I can show you really quick. Is we want this to appear the same way in my table in Balsamiq. So to achieve that, I have to delete these two paragraph marks and actually add this command to do a line break. So it's a \R. I did it on all of these here. That's the only thing I changed. So everything else stays the same. But this will just make it quicker for me to paste and show you. Okay, so now I have my data. I'm going to go to this file, and I'm going to zoom out a little bit. And those are the pre-made ones. But so here's the data table grid. I'll even just show you from here so it just comes in like this. I'm going to make it the same width as my source, I would say, and then paste it in there. So I did a little bit of styling through the Numbers app, and now it lays out the way that I want it to. And now I'm ready to start stylizing it and designing it. So I want to first start by recreating what this looks like. So, I can remove the border. I can remove those horizontal lines and add these. I'm going to change this. And then I'm also going to add some rule lines because these rule lines are in here. So just going to do that really quick. So that's a very quick version of it. These lines are lighter, and I'll fix that. So essentially, you know, it looks like this. I added this part, but here is me recreating the table I want to fix. So this is my starting point. So the next thing I want to do is start applying some of those UI principles I talked about. So like the first one that stands out to me is these dark lines, you know, for the rows. I don't want that. I already have striping here. I think striping works better. I also want these lines to be lighter. So I will just make them a little lighter. Kind of forgot one here. I can get it. Okay. So I like that. I also actually want it to be a little taller. So I'm going to drop this down a bit and change the row height to 50 just to give more space. So this is a good start. So this is already looking a little better. I want to push these back a little bit. So, you know, I don't really care who my team played last. Again, I'm not much of a super fan, so I don't really care that they played the Broncos or whatever. So I'm going to show you a technique to sort of block out this text a bit. So this is opacity. I changed the color and then I changed the opacity. So now whoever we played last is not as prominent as the name of the player. I can just copy and paste. Actually, I should do this one. This one has to be a white background, not gray, because of the thing. And do one more. And then I'm just going to, what I'm doing is copying and pasting. So I'm just using the keyboard commands to like paste. And, you know, it's really quick. So here's what it looks like, made it a little wider. So what I did is I reduced opacity for less important information and added horizontal and vertical space. So now it's much easier for me to look at. The next step I would do is think of ways to call out the data that's important to me more. So one of the ways I was going to do that is, you know, I've seen this a lot. Why not highlight the important rows for each player? So, you know, if you're a quarterback, your passing stats are more important, maybe rushing, but, you know, that's important. So one of the things I'm also trying to think of too is what that color is communicating. So, you know, I know from playing this fantasy football stuff that 16 points for a quarterback is actually pretty low. So I'll update that. But I'll use color to signify how well you did. So you're kind of reddish. I know that scoring this many points is actually pretty good. So I will change that to like a green color, like a positive color. Somewhat arbitrary. To me, I feel like if I saw green, I would think green is good, but who knows, right? So he has 8 points, so I would probably say this person didn't do so well, so I would change it to like a reddish color, and so on. So I kind of pre-did this, but I do want to change this to red because that's not that good. So now if I just glance at my screen, I can say like, okay, I had 3 people did pretty good. Also, I know I took this percentage starting, which I had to look up what that meant, which means that the number of people in this whole league that started that same player. So I know that very few people started this player and he actually didn't do so well. The color highlights allow me to just focus on very specific sections. And I think that's like very helpful. That's what I want to glance at. I'm not a pro user. So these little pieces of design like help me focus where I need to focus my attention. Another one is to hide data when possible and to use human language. So what I did was I actually just removed all of these stats from my main table here because I'm really just focused on how many points they scored. So that's what's most important to me. And then from there, I kind of want to demo this, but I don't want to take up too much time. So I'm going to demo really quick how I did this. I basically want to make space here so that I can show, you know, this hidden information that if I'm interested in the statistics, I can easily show that. So what I'm going to do is just like hide everything there, copy it and drag it. And then, so now I can delete this top 2 rows in my table because I don't need them. I'll have to get rid of that. But now I have all this space here where I can sort of mimic a drop down and add more information. So I just add a box here, no border. And do that. And now I have all this space to play with. So if I'm interested to see further important stats of the game, I can do that here. So I already set it up. And I decided, I like making things bigger. So this allows me to read their stats far better. And another thing I did not call out is I used human language. So I did not abbreviate each of these because I saved so much space removing content I wasn't going to look at. I know now that fan points meant fantasy points, which I really didn't even know, and projected points. And, there's more like that were in that grid that I didn't understand, and allowing me to have this space made it easier for someone who's new to quickly adapt and understand it. Okay, so that was my redesign of, this really simple data table here. I like this one. I'd probably stick with this based on how I would use it. But I wanted to push it a little further because of thinking outside the table. I really don't even need it to be in a table. So one of the things I thought of is how, we had this dashboard plus the data table. That would be actually really impactful for me. You can tell me exactly how well I did, who my best player was, and who the least performing player was. And I can call it out really simply. And I can also have all this, table. So if I want to dive in and see more, it's all right here. I want to change this more. I want to design it better, but whatever. This was actually my favorite design, which is taking the idea of card UI and applying it to fantasy football or this type of data, where I'm really calling out, using color and using big numbers to call out the points that they scored. So these are their fantasy points. If they did poorly, it would be a darker red. If they did really well, it would be a light green or bright green. No idea. Again, those are all just sort of arbitrary choices, but I can look at this and understand, okay, these people didn't do so great. I would, down in this bottom area, which you probably can't see, is I would have the players I can sub in. And if I wanted to see more details about how they played, I can click and get a card. All of that stuff is all available here. And I think it would be, for me as a non-super user, would be very easy to use and understand, and I would actually like the experience better. So that is all I had. I'm going to fill in these resources. Thank you. I didn't say that yet. You can also visit our site, balsamiq.com/learn to learn more. And here's my contact information. We do have a Slack community. You don't even have to DM me. You can just message me in one of our rooms. And so I'm going to share this file with everyone. I have a file that will have all the resources linked to it. And I'll be probably sharing the keynote as well as a PDF if you need it. And now it's time for Q&A. So I'm going to stop sharing and see if there's any questions. Okay. I see there's some questions. I'm going to answer the first question. I wish I can share this. So if the question is it best practice to include both first and last name in one column or separate into two columns? So I'm going to answer that live. I think it's always best to have them. Well, I guess it depends on how it's being used, but very typically a name is a name and you don't need to sort by either first name or last name. So you should really have just one column. And that's typically systematic of pulling data from a database. The database has everything separated, and that's fine. That's how they need to do it for their records. But what you're putting out, the UI, the front end, what people are seeing, it's actually better to keep it easy to read, and you don't need to have two columns for that. Okay. Someone said they learned something new, which makes me happy. I hope this is the beginning of thinking of your projects slightly differently, and approaching the problem not just with what's typical, what's in front of you, but exploring other ideas. There is a link to the article in the Q&A section, and I don't know, I'm here to answer any more questions if you want, please do. I'm not sure how else. I don't know, I don't got anything else, anyone. Anyone, questions? I got to tell you, it's difficult to not be able to see attendee information and stuff, but it's good. But I want you to be able to interact if you feel the need. But I can also just wrap it up. Give it a few more minutes. One thing I can post in our chat, because you can't see my screen, is I will get the URL for our Slack community. And obviously, I can post a link to my email. And I'm going to do that now. And if I don't have any other questions, we can wrap it up. But I think that the Slack community is a nice way for all of you to interact. And with us here, the education team and the company in general, we are always there to be answering questions on our Slack channel. So it's pretty active, especially with the anyone in the community. I have another question. Let me read it really quick. Sorry, everyone can read it at once because it's open. That's interesting. Okay, so when we have a multi-system, sort of like multi-roles within one system, and we try to build the same layout table and then share features independence with the same system role. Do you follow that approach, or do you use the Christmas tree mode to represent the entire model of tables? I'm not sure what the Christmas tree mode is, and I would Google that, but and if you want to, follow up with that and let me know what that is, or I can read it really quick. I've actually done the different views for different system roles design, which worked okay. But there is a point where it becomes a bit hard to handle. It was trying to have a view for each type of user got to be a bit much because it started features from the data table of one, someone wanted part of that feature, and it just got difficult to manage. But it can help. I would say also try not to have your data tables do more than they can. Sometimes there's a tendency to sort of add every possible thing within there to try to solve every use case. And that just, again, makes it harder for everyone to do their daily job. And it might be beneficial for maybe one person or one situation, but you want to understand how everyone is using it so that it's the most efficient for the most people. One of the things I tried to stress when doing this big data work at the last place I was consulting was that you can have all the features you want and it could be very like pro, almost you have to be a pro user to use it, but you're lowering the accessibility of the product to just normal people. So say someone else starts at the company, they have to learn how to use this data table. The chances of them making a lot of mistakes early is pretty high. So thinking of the terms of making it usable for every type of person and then layering on those advanced features is sort of the best way to go, because you're making sure that it's always performing well for most of the people using it. And there's another question in Q&A. I'm going to answer it. I'm in the original database creation stage, and I'm wondering how best to prepare a column that has multiple tags that describe the organization's type. So if an organization falls under more than one type, do I want to have 10 different potential type columns to define that attribute? Sorry, I just heard my printer go off. It scared me. How would you prepare that data to be easily? Okay, so I'm thinking of a column that has multiple tags. That's interesting. I would think that would fall possibly in the hidden data, like hide data that's not necessarily relevant to view. But just because it's hidden within the row, or maybe, that style where you have a few filters do this a lot, where here's a few filters that are applied plus like that symbol to show that there's more. And maybe that row can work as a drop down to show all of them. But yeah, I mean, if it's an important part that someone would want to search for, searching the data table for specific tags, I would include them, but consider hiding them and designing it in a way that we don't always have to see it and it doesn't get in our way, I guess. Good question. Thank you. I'm going to type in my email here too if you want to email me. I could share that screen again, but that's most of the information. Actually, one more URL in the chat, and we do plan on posting this on our, sorry, let me just type this really quick. We do plan on posting this video on our website plus the resources used, so you'll be able to do with it what you want. And yeah, okay, another question. Which is a better approach? Show some details above the table and below, or show data table and show details under it? I think I understand what you're saying. Usually, so what I think of whenever you're trying to display information is you think about the importance of the information and you kind of go from a top-down approach. So, and my gut reaction to this is if the table is the more important information and then the extra details are secondary, I would have it below. We usually always try to think of top-down approach when we're referring to it, because that's how our minds will even like visually see it. Like if there's extra unimportant details up here, and then here's the main details, I'll probably even just overlook that, looking for the important stuff. And thank you for the questions. I'm gonna wait another few, 30 seconds or so, and I think, ooh, another one. That's a good question. Depending, so the question in the Q&A is for data tables is pagination. Which do you prefer, pagination or infinite scroll? I've done both, and it depends. For me, it always depended on the responsiveness of the system, because we tried to do infinite scroll and it was taking too long, where you don't want to wait and see that spinning wheel for more than a few seconds. So if your system isn't fast enough to load the data, I would definitely do the pagination, because it's just you're showing the user what to expect. Like, here's all the data, hit this to see more. If you're giving them the expectation that they can quickly scroll through and it'll quickly load, but it doesn't, and then you're going to have a frustrated user. So our system at the time wasn't responsive, so we switched it to the pagination. And I'm not sure if that is exactly 100% clear to everyone. So pagination would mean at the bottom of your table, it would have like numbers, it'd be paged, right? So like you're on the first page and you can click next to the next page. And then obviously infinite scroll would mean like you scroll to the bottom and more would load. Thanks for the question, Alex. Well, I think we can wrap up. Ooh, one more question. This is pertaining horizontal scroll. I'm actually super okay with that. Again, it's all about data that is important to the user. Each column needs to be there for a reason. And if it's not being used, don't have it in there, you can hide it in some way that we talked about. But in general, if you have enough data and you need to scroll, there are some great ways to accommodate scrolling. One of them is the most popular, and which is one of my most favorite, is whatever the first column is in your data table should be the most important. And if you have a really wide data table, I would freeze that first column so you never lose that really important base information. So for me, my examples, it was the order number. The order number was the most important thing. So I always want that to stay there, but then everything else can kind of scroll underneath it. And thank you everyone for attending. I feel like I should share that screen one more time, but I will. All right. Well, I'm going to wrap it up. That's it. And thank you everyone for attending. And please feel free to reach out to any of us on at Balsamiq with questions. And I hope you have a great day.